She trusted him with everything, her loyalty, her years, her life. And he threw her off a cliff for it. This is the story of Luna Serafina Vale, a woman who built an empire with her bare hands, loved a man who didn't deserve it, and survived what should have been her grave. Before we go further, drop your city in the comments right now, wherever you're watching from. Hit that like button and stay until the very end, because what happens to Serafina will shake you to your core. This story isn't just hers. It belongs to every person who was ever betrayed by someone they built from nothing. The morning Serafina found the ledgers tampered with, she said nothing to anyone. That was the thing about her. The part Darius had never understood, not in 7 years of sleeping beside her, not in the thousands of mornings she rose before him to manage the correspondence and the supply routes, and the grievances of 36 subpacks scattered across Silver Ridge territory. She absorbed trouble the way stone absorbs water in a flood. Quietly, with no visible seam. And she worked the problem alone until it either broke or she did. She sat at the long table in the Eastern Records room with the window cracked and the cold morning air cutting across her forearms. And she turned the pages of the trade ledger slowly, the way you turn pages when you already know what you're going to find, and you're just building the courage to stop pretending you don't. The numbers were wrong, not wrong the way a tired scribe makes wrong, a misplaced decimal, a column added in haste. These were wrong the way a deliberate hand makes wrong, erasure marks under the ink. Figures re-entered at different values, 18 months of slow surgical bleeding from the eastern grain reserves. Someone had been draining Silver Ridge from the inside, and they'd done it carefully enough that the gap only showed now because Serafina had been cross-referencing 3 separate ledgers against the physical inventory count she'd run herself last week. She pressed her thumb against the corner of one page, pressed hard, let the edge cut into her skin because pain sharpened thought better than coffee. She already had a guess. The guess sat in the back of her throat like something she couldn't swallow. She closed the ledger, set it back in its exact position, and walked out of the records room with her face entirely still. Vivian Crow had arrived in Silver Ridge 11 months ago with a horse, a traveling case, and a letter of introduction from the Westfall Pax Beta that Serafina had verified twice because it had felt too smooth, too perfect, the kind of letter that answered every question before anyone thought to ask it. Vivian was 26, dark-haired, and built like someone who had learned early that beauty was armor. She smiled at the right moments. She deferred to Serafina in public with exactly the right degree of warmth, respectful but not servile, admiring but not fawning. She had started working in the territory's alliance office within 3 weeks. Serafina had approved the appointment herself, because Vivian was genuinely skilled and because Silver Ridge needed people who could manage diplomatic correspondence without being told twice. That was the piece that still lodged in her chest like a splinter. She had brought Vivian in. She had opened the door. What she hadn't anticipated was that Darius would look at Vivian the way he used to look at everything that was new and untested and not yet marked by difficulty. Darius Blackthorne at his core had always been drawn to the unblemished thing. It was his best quality as a young man, that hunger for potential, that refusal to accept a ceiling. It was his worst quality now that he was 41, and those impulses had nowhere to go except toward a woman who had correctly identified exactly what he needed to hear. Serafina wasn't stupid. She had watched it happen. She had measured her response carefully because she knew Darius, knew the way his pride calcified under direct challenge, knew that confronting him bluntly would make it worse. She had tried the patient approach, the measured conversation in private, the careful question. What she hadn't calculated was how thoroughly Vivian had already been working him. She found Darius in the war room at mid-morning. He was standing at the territory map with 2 senior warriors, tracing a boundary line with one finger. And when Serafina entered, he glanced at her with the expression she had been watching develop for the past 4 months, a slight tensing around the eyes, a brief flicker of something that might have been guilt if it hadn't so quickly become irritation. "I need to speak with you," she said, privately. One of the warriors, old Cade, started to step out. Darius stopped him with a hand. "Whatever you need to say it. Cade and Marin have heard harder things." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the ledger. She thought about the right way to approach this. "The Eastern grain reserves," she said. We're 18 months short on the books. Someone has been adjusting the records. Darius turned fully from the map. What do you mean, adjusting? I mean the figures were altered after entry. There's a gap between what the physical count shows and what the formal ledger records. The difference is significant enough that if we hit a hard winter and our trade agreements hold to contracted supply, we won't have the buffer we think we have. Silence. Kate and Marin both went very still in the way seasoned pack members went still when they understood that what was happening in front of them was above their rank. You're saying someone stole from us, Darius said. I'm saying the records were manipulated. That's what I can confirm right now. I need access to the Alliance Office correspondence archives to cross-reference the outgoing trade invoices against the Alliance Office. Something shifted in his voice. Not anger yet, something colder. Why the Alliance Office specifically? Plus, because the timing of the alterations matches the period since the eastern trade routes were managed from there. Darius set down the map tool in his hand. Slowly. The way men set things down when they are deciding something and they don't want the deciding to show. You're pointing at Vivian, he said. I'm pointing at a timeline. The timeline points at the Alliance Office. That is not a small thing to suggest. I'm not suggesting. I'm reporting what the physical evidence shows and asking for access to verify it fully. That's all. He looked at her for a long time with an expression she couldn't entirely read, which was new because she had been able to read Darius Blackthorne since she was 23 years old. The fact that she couldn't anymore was a data point she had been refusing to fully sit with. I'll look into it, he said. When? When I decide to. His voice had gone flat. You don't set the timeline in this room, Serafina. You never have. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then she nodded and walked out. Dead. She had not always been Luna. That was the thing people forgot about her, or maybe had never known, because by the time she was 28, she had grown so completely into the role that it looked like she had been born to it. She had not been born to it. She had been born to a mid-rank family in the Southern Quarter, the eldest daughter of a supply coordinator, and a woman who had spent her entire life making sure other people had enough. Serafina had inherited her mother's accounting mind and her father's capacity for silence in rooms where silence was dangerous. She had come to Darius's attention because she was the one who had spotted the fraud in the old Beta's supply contracts, an 18-month scheme nearly identical to the one she was looking at now, as it happened, except that one had been sloppy and obvious by comparison. She had brought the evidence to the council floor herself at 22, in front of men twice her age who had half her actual authority, and she had laid it out without flinching. Darius had watched from the far end of the table. He had been 25, newly elevated to alpha after his father's death, and he had looked at her the way she now recognized he looked at untested things. He had asked her to stay after the council cleared. They had talked for 3 hours. She had left with a formal appointment as territory auditor and an awareness, low in her chest, that something had shifted in the architecture of her life. 2 years later, she was his Luna. Bonded, committed, the second weight-bearing wall of Silver Ridge's foundation. She had not become his Luna by being soft. She had become his Luna by being necessary. The distinction mattered. It always had. Vivienne found her in the corridor outside the Eastern Records room 2 days later. She was alone, which she rarely was in formal spaces. Usually she kept at least one administrative aide in tow, a habit Serafina had always noted as either political instinct or performance. Today she was alone, and she was dressed simply, and she wore the expression of a woman who had prepared carefully for what she was about to say. Luna, Vivienne stopped at a respectful distance. Do you have a moment? I have several things that require my attention. Make it brief. I know what you showed Darius, Vivienne said. Her voice was level. No defensiveness. That was the first tell. An innocent person would have led with confusion or hurt. Vivienne led with the assumption of Serafina's knowledge as common ground, which meant she had been briefed by Darius and had decided to meet it head-on. I want you to know that I understand why the evidence looks the way it does. Then explain it. The timing is coincidental. I was tasked with restructuring the Eastern correspondence system. That meant pulling old invoices, creating new filing categories, moving documents between departments. Some of that process created gaps in the paper trail that I will admit look suspicious out of context. Serafina studied her. That's a reasonable explanation. I'll need to verify it against the original assignment orders. Of course. Vivian smiled. Warm. Perfect. I have them in my office. I'd be glad to walk you through everything. I'll come to you, Serafina said. Don't reorganize anything before I do. The smile held. Naturally. Serafina walked away. Her shoulders did not tighten until she turned the corner and was fully out of sight. She thought, she's good. She thought, she's been doing this longer than I realized. She thought, whatever she shows me tomorrow will be immaculate because she had the night to make it immaculate. And underneath that, Darius told her, within hours of our conversation. He told her exactly what I said and exactly what I was looking for. She pressed her back against the stone wall for exactly 10 seconds, eyes closed, breath measured. Then she pushed off and kept walking. Bad. The assignment orders Vivian showed her the next morning were clean. Too clean. Crisp paper, fresh ink signed by a junior administrator Serafina had checked on afterward and found was no longer in Silver Ridge's employ, having departed 4 months prior for family reasons. The date on the orders was consistent with the timeline Vivian had described. The filing reorganization explanation was plausible. Serafina sat across from Vivian in the Alliance office and went through every page with the thoroughness that had made her indispensable at 22. And she found nothing she could take to the council floor. Nothing provable. A sophisticated, careful nothing that would crumble in her hands if she tried to hold it up to the light. She set the last page down. Thank you, she said. I'll continue my review of the reserve records through other channels. Of course. Vivian folded her hands on the table. I hope you find what you're looking for, Luna. Silver Ridge's security matters to all of us. Serafina looked at her. Just looked. The way she had looked at fraudsters and manipulators across council tables for 15 years, reading the stillness of the face, the ease of the breath, the angle of the gaze. Vivian held it perfectly. I'm sure it does, Serafina said, and left. The canyon meeting was not her idea. 3 days later, a messenger brought her a note in Darius's hand, 4 lines asking her to meet him at the Blackstone Canyon overlook at dusk, a location they had walked together dozens of times over the years, when there was something between them that needed open air to say. She read it twice. She thought about the locked drawer in her office where she had secured her personal notes on the ledger discrepancies, in case she needed them later. She thought about leaving word with someone. She didn't, because it was Darius. Even now, even after everything she had watched happen over the past months, some part of her still believed in the man she had watched build this territory with his hands, still believed he was capable, under the noise and the new obsession, of remembering what they had built together and choosing it. That was her mistake, not a naive mistake, a human one. The kind you make when you have invested 15 years of yourself into a person, and the alternative to believing in them is accepting a truth you aren't ready for. She rode to the canyon alone. Darius was already there when she arrived, standing at the overlook with his back to her, his hands loose at his sides. The canyon dropped 300 feet below the ledge. The last light was going red and flat across the stone. She dismounted, tied her horse to the scrub pine 20 feet back, walked to him. You came, he said without turning. You asked me to. I did. He turned then, and his face was wrong. It was the face she had been watching turn wrong for months, finally arrived fully at a destination she had been dreading. His jaw was set. His eyes were not meeting hers at the right angle. We need to talk about what you're doing. What I'm doing, she said carefully, is investigating a financial discrepancy in the reserve records, which is my responsibility as, you're going after Vivian. I'm following evidence. You're threatened by her. His voice had a tremor in it, not anger, something more volatile, something that wanted to believe what it was saying. And because you're threatened, you are manufacturing a case against someone who has done nothing wrong. She stared at him. Darius, I showed you the ledger discrepancies. They're real. Vivian explained the ledger. Vivian produced documentation that cannot be verified because the administrator who signed it left 4 months ago. That is not an explanation. You are not the arbiter of what counts as evidence in this territory. Her voice went flat. Then who is? He didn't answer that. He turned away from her again toward the canyon, and the red light caught the side of his face and made him look older than she had seen him in years. She stood still and watched him and understood, in the way that you understand the worst things, all at once, with terrible clarity, that this conversation was not happening because Darius had looked at the evidence and found her wanting. It was happening because someone had told him a story about his Luna's motivations that was easier to believe than the alternative, because the alternative, that the woman he had chosen over 15 years of loyalty was running a scheme against them, required him to have been catastrophically wrong. And Darius Blackthorne did not survive catastrophic wrongness. His identity couldn't hold it. Easier to believe the woman who had been here for 15 years had become the enemy. Easier to believe the new arrival, who told him every day that he saw things clearly, that he was right, that his instincts were sound. "I want you to stop," he said. "Darius, I want you to stop the investigation. I want you to leave Vivian alone, and I want you to think very carefully about what it means that you are willing to tear apart a woman's reputation because you feel—" "Don't." Her voice came out low and sharp. "Don't tell me what I feel. You don't know what I feel right now. You haven't looked at me clearly in 6 months." He turned back. His eyes were fully on her now. Too fully. That volatile thing was closer to the surface. "You want to talk about not looking clearly?" he said. "You have been working against me in this territory. I have had reports—" "What reports?" "From more than one source. That you have been speaking to the council elders separately. That you have been suggesting my leadership is compromised. That you have been positioning yourself—" "That is a lie. Not raised, precise, and cold. That is a fabricated lie, and you know it. And if you have had reports like that, you should be asking yourself very carefully who brought them to you and why." "I know who brought them. It was Vivian." The name landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Of course it was Vivian. Darius, listen to me. I have given 15 years to this territory. I have given 15 years to you. I have never once—" "Stop." His voice cracked on it. "Stop making this about what you've given. Stop making it about years and sacrifice and— Then what is it about?" She took a step toward him. Her voice was shaking now. She hadn't intended that. "Tell me what it is about. Tell me what she told you about me." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before in 15 years. Something close to contempt, or the thing that contempt is a cover for, which is fear. "She told me the truth," he said. "She told me you've been afraid of losing your position for 2 years, and that everything you've done, the record-keeping, the council relationships, the audits, all of it is about control, about making yourself irreplaceable so that I can never—" She laughed. It came out broken, which she hadn't intended either. "Making myself irreplaceable. Darius, I am irreplaceable. Not because I engineered it, because I built things that run on my knowledge. Take me out of Silver Ridge, and within a season the systems collapse. That's not manipulation. That's 15 years of structural work. That is what I am to this territory." "That," he said, "is exactly the problem." She went quiet. He turned away from her again. His shoulders were rigid. His hands were fists at his sides. "She told me something else," he said. His voice had gone strange. Quiet. "About why the Northern Coalition contact reached out to you last month. Not to the council, not to me. To you, specifically." Serafina frowned. "The Northern Moon Coalition sent a diplomatic inquiry about trade route adjustments. It came to me because I managed trade route correspondence. That is—" "She said you've been negotiating with them separately." He didn't turn around. "For yourself." "That is—" She stopped, started again. "That is not true. That is not even close to true. I can show you every piece of correspondence. I've seen correspondence." He finally turned. His face had made a decision. She could see it. The decision already made. The reasoning just now catching up to it. "I've seen her file." She stared at him. "Her file?" "The file she brought me. Transcripts, records of your separate communications, documentation of what you've been planning." whatever documents she showed you are forged." Her voice was absolutely steady. She had gone past the trembling place into somewhere colder and more certain. "Darius, whatever she showed you, I am telling you they are forged. I am asking you to compare them to actual records. I am asking you to—" "I don't need to compare them." He took a step toward her. "I saw your handwriting." "She can replicate my handwriting. She's been studying—" She heard herself and understood how it sounded and knew with ice-cold clarity that understanding how something sounds is different from having time to do anything about it. "Darius, stop. Listen to me. Just stop and listen." "I have listened." He was closer now, 3 feet. His eyes were doing something she had never seen eyes do in his face. "I have listened to you for 15 years. I am done listening." There were footsteps behind her. She turned. Vivienne stepped out from behind the stone outcropping to the left, 20 feet away. She had been there the whole time, waiting. Her face was arranged in an expression of sorrow that was so precisely calibrated it was almost art. "Serafina," she said, soft as a wound. "I didn't want this." Serafina looked at her, looked back at Darius, looked at the canyon behind him, the 300 feet of open air below the ledge, the red light on the stone. She understood what this was. "Darius," she said, "step back from this. Whatever she's told you, whatever she's shown you, you have a choice right now. You can step back from this." His jaw worked. His eyes were wet, which was the worst part. The fact that he believed it, genuinely believed the story she had built for him, and was grieving over it like it was real loss. "There's no stepping back," he said. "You've been working against us for 2 years. You're going to take everything we built and hand it to them. I won't—" His voice broke. "I won't let that happen." "Darius." He moved. She had time to realize what was happening. She did not have time to stop it. His hands hit her shoulders. The force of it was enormous. Alpha strength, all of it. No restraint. The canyon behind her and the momentum carrying her back. And then the edge was gone under her feet, and there was nothing but air, red and wide and cold. And the stone wall of the canyon rising past her as she fell, and Darius's face above, already looking away. The last thing she heard before the wind took everything was Vivienne's voice, clear and controlled. "It had to be done, Jad." She did not die. That was the impossible thing, the thing that would later be described in whispers across every territory that heard the story, that she hit the canyon's first rock ledge 40 feet down, and the impact broke 3 of her ribs and her left arm, and knocked her unconscious but did not kill her, that she slid from that ledge to the canyon floor another 60 feet below, wrapped in the scrub brush that broke her momentum enough to matter, that the river at the bottom was shallow there, too shallow to drown in, but cold enough to keep the swelling down. She lay in the dark at the bottom of Blackstone Canyon with her broken arm in the water and 3 broken ribs pressing into her lungs with every breath, and she did not die, because her body had been built for 15 years on the same principle she had applied to everything else. Absorb the damage, find the structural core, keep it upright. She breathed. Each breath was a small negotiation with the ribs. She did not think about Darius. She did not have the capacity for it yet. The mind seals certain doors when the body needs all available resources for the immediate project of surviving. She thought about the river, the direction of the current, the canyon walls, and whether there was a traversable route up or whether she needed to follow the water out. She thought about distance and terrain and temperature, and then she stopped thinking about those things too because the thinking was using oxygen she couldn't spare. She lay in the shallow water with the last of the daylight dying above her, and she breathed and breathed and breathed. Far above, on the canyon rim, 2 sets of footsteps walked away. She was still alive. She was the only one who knew it. And somewhere in the fractures of her chest, under the broken bones and the cold and the absolute darkness of the canyon floor, something that had been patient for a very long time finally stopped being patient. It did not have a name yet. It did not need one. It waited. She didn't choose that direction. Her body chose it. The way a body makes choices when the conscious mind has gone somewhere quiet and protected, conserving itself. She came back to awareness in pieces. The cold first, then the sound of the water, then the pain which arrived not all at once but in waves, each one more specific than the last. Her ribs cataloging themselves for her one by one until she had a complete inventory of what was broken. Left arm. 3 ribs on the right side, possibly 4. Something wrong in her left knee that was either a deep bruise or a tear. A gash along her right temple that had stopped bleeding but had sealed itself with canyon grit, which meant infection if she didn't clean it within a day. She pushed herself upright with her right arm. The canyon floor was dark now. Full night, no moon yet. The water was maybe 6 inches deep where she lay, cold enough to have kept the swelling manageable, which was the only reason she could move at all. She sat in the shallows and breathed and did not allow herself to think about Darius's hands on her shoulders. The force of it, the way he had already been looking away before she cleared the edge. Not yet. That was a wound she couldn't afford to open while she was still at the bottom of a canyon. She got to her feet. It took 3 attempts and cost her a sound she didn't entirely suppress, low and involuntary, the kind of sound a person makes when the body overrides their control. She stood. The knee held. She oriented herself by the water's direction and started moving south. She walked for 4 hours before she found the canyon's southern exit, a gradual slope where the walls dropped and the riverbed widened into flatland scrub. She climbed out on her knees, her right hand grabbing at root and rock, her left arm held against her body. At the top, she lay flat on the ground for a long time, just breathing the open air, and the first stars had gone, and a gray pre-dawn was beginning in the east when she finally allowed herself to think one clear thought about what had happened. He believed her. Not just believed her story, believed it enough to put his hands on his Luna of 15 years and push her off a cliff in the dark, which meant either Vivian was exceptional or Darius had been ready to believe it. Had been building the architecture for belief for months, needing only the right story to move in and fill the space. Both things could be true at once. She filed that away, not for grief, for later. She got up and kept walking. The Northern Moon Coalition's nearest outpost was 3 days' walk from Blackstone Canyon under normal conditions. She covered it in 4.5 days, moving slower than she would have preferred, stopping when the ribs locked her breath down to something she couldn't work through. She slept in 2-hour intervals. She ate what the terrain offered, thin pickings in early spring, but enough. She drank from streams. She cleaned the temple wound with alcohol from the small kit she kept in her riding jacket, which she had been wearing the night of the canyon, which turned out to be the difference between infection and not. She arrived at the Coalition's border outpost at dawn on the 5th day, looking like something the wilderness had tried to consume and partially succeeded. The 2 sentries on the gate were young, 20, maybe 22, and they looked at her the way people look at things they can't immediately categorize. "Coalition territory," the taller one said. "State your name and origin." Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "Serafina Vale, I was Luna of Silver Ridge Pack. I need to speak with your ranking officer." A pause. The 2 sentries exchanged a look that carried a conversation she wasn't supposed to read. "Silver Ridge," the shorter one said. "That's Eastern Territory." "I know where it is. I ran it for 15 years. Another pause. The taller one straightened slightly, which was either a tell of recognition or a preparatory shift. "Wait here." She waited. She did not sit down because she was not certain she could stand back up quickly, and she was not willing to be sitting when whoever came through that gate came through it. Some things were tactical. Some things were about what you chose to project in the first 10 seconds of a new situation. The woman who came through the gate was 40, compact, with a scar across her chin, and the kind of eyes that did the measuring before the mouth asked any questions. She was dressed in the Northern Moon Coalition's dark field uniform. She stopped 6 feet from Serafina and looked at her, really looked, the assessment of someone who had seen enough damaged people to read the damage accurately. "Luna Vale," she said. Not a question. "Not Luna anymore," Serafina said. "Just Vale." "Isabel Crane, Coalition Field Commander." She didn't offer her hand, which Serafina respected. Unnecessary gestures when both parties had more pressing information to exchange. "What happened to you?" "I was thrown off Blackstone Canyon by my alpha." Serafina kept her voice even. "I survived. I walked here. I would like somewhere to sit down and a person with medical training, in that order." Isabel Crane looked at her for another 2 seconds. Whatever calculation she ran during those 2 seconds reached a conclusion. "Come inside," she said. The coalition's field medic was a small, precise man named Arlen, who worked with the focused intensity of someone for whom medicine was less a calling than a problem-solving discipline. He set her arm, bound her ribs, cleaned and closed the temple wound, and assessed the knee as ligament damage that would heal if she rested it, all with minimal conversation, which suited her. When he was done, he told her she had no business having walked 4.5 days on those ribs, and left the room. Isabel came back in 20 minutes later with 2 mugs of something hot and set one in front of Serafina without being asked. "The coalition has been watching Silver Ridge territory for 6 months, she said, taking the chair across the table. "We've been seeing irregularities, financial irregularities. Among other things." Isabel wrapped both hands around her mug. "Outgoing trade commitments that don't match the contracted volumes. Alliance partners getting different information from Silver Ridge's central office than they were getting from the regional coordinators. We sent a diplomatic inquiry to your office." "I know, 3 weeks ago. I was the one who received it." Isabel's eyes sharpened. "You didn't respond." "I was building a case. I needed more before I could respond to a foreign coalition with anything substantive." Serafina paused, breathed carefully past the bound ribs. "Someone else apparently knew about that inquiry. Used it as evidence that I was negotiating with you separately, against Silver Ridge." Isabel was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "The person who threw you off the cliff. The person who told the person who threw me off the cliff. There's a distinction." "Vivian Crow," Isabel said. Serafina looked at her. "We know the name," Isabel said. "She's not from Westfall. The letter of introduction was legitimate. We verified that much. But the history before Westfall is constructed. We've been trying to determine who she's actually working for and what the end goal is." She paused. "We didn't move fast enough." "No," Serafina agreed. "You didn't." That landed with appropriate weight. Isabel accepted it without flinching, which confirmed the assessment Serafina had been building since the gate. "What do you want?" Isabel said. "Right now? I want information. I want everything your intelligence network has built on Vivian Crow, her actual origin, her financing, and her contacts inside and outside Silver Ridge territory. I want to know exactly what she took from the reserve ledgers and where it went." Serafina set her mug down. "After that, I want to decide what to do about it with full information in front of me. I don't make decisions in the dark." "And Silver Ridge itself," Isabel said carefully. "You've walked away from it. I was pushed away from it. The difference being, pushed means it wasn't my choice. It means the conditions that existed when I left are not the conditions I'm bound by." She looked at Isabel directly. "I built Silver Ridge's systems from the foundation. Every trade route, every alliance relationship, every financial protocol. I built them, or I rebuilt them, or I supervised their construction. Without me, those systems run for maybe 60 days before the gaps start to open. By the end of winter, they'll be in crisis." Isabel was watching her with an expression that had moved past measuring into something closer to actual attention. "You're very certain of that," she said. "I'm not certain of it. I designed it that way." A pause. "That's not arrogance. That's how you build a position that can't be easily dismantled. You make yourself the load-bearing wall. The people who know they need you tend to treat you accordingly." She let the weight of that sit for exactly 1 second. Darius forgot that. He'll remember. She was right about the 60 days. She was actually optimistic. It took 43. She spent those 43 days in the Coalition's northern compound, healing and learning. Arlen cleared her to walk without the knee brace after 2 weeks, cleared the ribs after 3. She spent the time usefully. Isabel's intelligence files on Vivian Crow turned out to be more substantial than Serafina had expected. 3 years of compiled evidence tracing a pattern that had been deployed in at least 2 other territories before Silver Ridge, always the same structure. Entry by introduction, alliance office placement, slow financial bleed, personal insertion at the alpha level, destabilization of the existing primary partnership. The end goal, as best Isabel's network could determine, was the trade routes. Silver Ridge's eastern corridors connected 5 major territories and controlled the most direct passage to the northern ports. Control Silver Ridge, control the passage. She's not working alone, Serafina said, on the 14th day, looking at the map Isabel had laid across the table. This level of coordination requires backing, someone with the reach to place her with a credible introduction and the resources to fund the ledger gap without it showing in any single account. We have 2 candidates, Isabel said, both with Eastern expansion interests and documented histories of acquisition by destabilization. Who moves like this doesn't want a war. They want the territory to fall into their hand. Serafina traced the eastern corridor with one finger. If Silver Ridge collapses internally, if the pack fractures, if Darius loses the warriors and the elders turn on him, the territory becomes available. New leadership, new terms. All the old alliances are void. And whoever placed Vivian there steps in as the stabilizing force, with the trade routes as the price of stabilization. She pulled her hand back from the map. How far along is the collapse? Isabel's expression answered before her words did. The news had been filtering in for 2 weeks through the coalition's network. The pack finances had begun to show open cracks within 3 weeks of Serafina's fall. The Eastern grain suppliers, men and women who had contracted with Silver Ridge for years because Serafina had built relationships that ran on trust and specific, reliable protocols, had started pulling back when the usual correspondence stopped arriving with its usual precision. 2 senior council elders had submitted resignation requests. A regional coordinator had simply left, taking 12 of his people with him. The warriors were still holding, but the territory's ability to supply them was deteriorating. 3 packs on Silver Ridge's southern border had sent probing communications, not aggressive, not yet, but the diplomatic language of entities checking the structural integrity of a wall they were considering pushing against. Darius, Serafina said, what's the read on him? Struggling, Isabel said. Our contacts say he's not sleeping. He's been pressing Vivian for solutions and she's producing explanations, not solutions. The council is starting to ask questions she can't answer with forged documents. Serafina was quiet for a moment. He'll figure out what she is, she said. Maybe not fully. Maybe not the whole architecture of it. But the evidence will accumulate beyond her ability to manage it, and he will have to face at least part of what he did. And when he does, Isabel said, what happens? He'll come looking for me. She said it without satisfaction. Without grief either. Just the flat certainty of someone who knows a mechanism they built from the inside. Not because he deserves forgiveness, because Silver Ridge needs what I know, and he knows it, and Darius has always been able to, at the very last possible moment, put the territory above his own pride. It's the one thing I was never able to take away from him. She stood from the table, moved to the window. The northern compound's training yard was below, young coalition warriors running drills in the cold morning. She watched them without really seeing them. Something had changed in her since the canyon. Not broken. She had survived too much to be broken by one fall, even that fall. But reconfigured. The patience that had been her primary instrument for 15 years had been replaced by something sharper. Less inclined toward waiting, less inclined toward absorbing. She thought, he will come. And when he comes, the question is not whether I go back. The question is under what terms. She turned from the window. I need a secure line to Elder Maris, she said. She's the senior council member. She's been there longer than Darius has been Alpha, and she's never been entirely comfortable with Vivian's access to the central records. Isabel looked at her carefully. You're moving already. I've been moving since I walked out of that canyon. Serafina held her gaze. I don't wait for the building to collapse before I decide where I want to be standing when it does. I decide now, and I position myself accordingly. And where do you want to be standing? She thought about Silver Ridge, the eastern corridors. The pack members who had trusted her, the elders who had brought their hard questions to her because they knew she would answer them honestly, the junior coordinators she had trained from the beginning, the systems she had built piece by piece over 15 years that were now beginning to fail for the first time because the one person who understood them from the foundation was gone. She thought about Darius's face above the canyon rim, already looking away. On higher ground, she said, than I've ever stood before. Isabel was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into the file on the table and slid a single sheet of paper across to Serafina. handwritten, dense, with a seal at the bottom Serafina recognized as Elder Maris's personal mark. "She already reached out to us," Isabel said. 4 days ago. She asked if we had any information on Lunavale's whereabouts. Serafina looked at the paper. Her name was in the first line. "She's not just asking for information," she said. "No," Isabel said. "She's not." Serafina picked up the paper. Read it fully. Set it back down. The territory was already calling her back. Not Darius. The territory. The people in it who understood, now that she was gone, exactly what she had been. And the gap between those two things, between what Darius thought he was removing and what the territory understood it had lost, was exactly the gap she intended to walk through. She looked at Isabel. "Get me that secure line." 2 days later, a rider arrived from Silver Ridge at the Coalition's outer gate. He was young, trail-worn, and he carried a sealed message bearing Darius's personal mark. The gate guard brought it to Serafina without opening it. She held it in her hand for a long moment. She had been right. 43 days. The building was cracking, and Darius was reaching for the one thing he'd thrown away. She set the message unopened on the table in front of her, looked at Isabel across the room. "He's asking me to come back," she said without opening it, because she didn't need to. She already knew. "What are you going to do?" Isabel asked. Serafina looked at the sealed message, at her own name in Darius's handwriting on the outside of it, at all the years compressed into that single familiar script. "I'm going to make him come here himself," she said. "In person. With the council. With witnesses." She pushed the message back across the table, unopened. "He wants what I built. He's going to have to kneel for it." The message sat unopened on the table for 6 days. On the 7th day, a second rider arrived. Then a third, 2 days after that. None of them carried Darius's mark. The second rider carried Elder Maris's seal. The third carried the combined marks of 4 council members, a formation Serafina had never seen used outside of formal succession proceedings. She opened that one. It was short. 11 lines. The kind of document that had been written and rewritten by committee until all the softness was negotiated out of it, leaving only the structural bones of the ask. Silver Ridge's Eastern trade agreements had formally suspended. The Harrow Pact to the south had moved 200 warriors to the border under the pretext of a joint exercise. The Pact's winter grain supply was confirmed at 60% of minimum need, with 3 months of cold left in the season. The Council was formally requesting Lunavale's return to advisory capacity, pending a full review of current leadership. Advisory capacity. She set the letter down. She had spent 15 years as the load-bearing wall of that territory, and they were asking her back as an advisor. The word was doing considerable work in that sentence. It was the word of people who needed her desperately, but hadn't yet finished negotiating with their own pride about exactly how much they needed her. She folded the letter, put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, against the ribs that had finished healing 2 weeks prior, the scar tissue still faintly tender when she pressed it. "Advisory capacity," she said aloud. Isabel was standing in the doorway. "I read it. What's your read?" "The council is fracturing. Half of them want you back as Luna with full authority restored. The other half are protecting Darius's position because full restoration implies full culpability, and that gets complicated for anyone who signed off on your status as a potential traitor before the evidence collapsed." Isabel came fully into the room and leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. Advisory is the compromise language. It's the word that keeps Darius technically in place while giving you operational control. It's the word that keeps me useful while keeping me in a position he can remove again when the crisis passes. "Yes." Serafina was quiet for a moment. The morning light came hard through the northern compound's narrow windows, the kind of light that didn't flatter anything. She had grown used to it. "When is Darius himself coming?" she said. "The writers suggest he's preparing to travel." The third writer indicated a delegation within the week. Isabel paused. "He's bringing elders, warriors. Apparently there's talk of a public acknowledgement." Public acknowledgement is not the same as accountability. She turned from the window. "But it's a start. I want to see his face when he says it. I want to see whether he's doing it because he understands what he did, or because he's run out of other options. Does the distinction change what you do? It changes what I ask for. Time. They arrived on a Thursday. 47 people. Darius at the front, which she had expected. Whatever else he was, he didn't send his people somewhere he wouldn't go himself. Elder Maris beside him, which was significant. 6 senior warriors, which was both a security detail and a statement. A junior administrative aide carrying the silver case that held the council's formal seal. Serafina watched them come through the coalition's outer gate from the upper walkway of the northern compound. Isabel stood beside her. Neither of them spoke. Darius looked up once, scanning the compound's upper level with the instinct of someone who always checked the high ground. His eyes found her, held for 2 seconds. Then he looked away and kept walking. He looked hollowed. Not broken. Darius didn't break, it wasn't in his architecture, but the density was gone from his face, the solid certainty that had always made him physically larger than his actual frame. He moved like a man carrying weight distributed wrong, too much of it forward, pressing on the chest. She had expected to feel something when she saw him. She had prepared for it. The anger, the grief, the complicated residue of 15 years compressing itself into a moment. What she felt instead was something cleaner and colder than either. She looked at him the way you look at structural damage. Assessing, determining load-bearing capacity, deciding what can be salvaged and what has to come down. She went downstairs to meet them. The formal meeting was held in the coalition's main hall, a long room with stone walls and a central table that seated 20. Isabel had arranged it deliberately neutral, nothing on the walls, no territorial markings, ground that belonged to neither party. Serafina entered from the east door. Darius was already seated at the table's center, Elder Maris to his left, the senior warriors arranged behind him in a line. He rose when she entered, which she noted. So did the warriors. Elder Maris rose last, slowly, with the deliberate timing of a woman who had been present at 20 years of territorial negotiations and understood that pace was its own form of authority. "Veil," Elder Maris said. "Elder." Serafina took the chair directly across from Darius. No aide beside her, no support arrangement, just herself and the table between them and 47 people watching every breath. "You made a long journey." "We did," Elder Maris said, "because what was done required—" "I'd like to hear it from him," Serafina said. Not unkindly, precisely. Silence. The warriors behind Darius shifted slightly. Elder Maris closed her mouth and sat back with an expression that was either approval or calculation, hard to tell which, with Maris. Darius looked at her. His jaw worked once. His hands were flat on the table, which was deliberate control. She recognized it because she had watched him use it in difficult councils for 15 years. "What I did at the canyon," he said, "was a crime. Against you. Against Silver Ridge. Against everything I took an oath to protect." His voice was level. Rough-edged but controlled. "I was manipulated. That is a fact, and it is also not sufficient. I had evidence in front of me. I had 15 years of evidence in front of me, and I chose to believe a constructed lie over everything I knew about you because—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "Because it was easier. Because the lie told me I wasn't the problem, and I wanted that to be true." The room was very still. Serafina held his gaze without expression. "I know that doesn't—" He stopped again, pressed both hands flat against the table. "I know there isn't a word I can say that adjusts what happened. I'm here because Silver Ridge is dying, and because I owe you the honesty of saying to your face that I put the territory in this position by making you the enemy instead of looking at what was actually in front of me." "Vivienne," she said, "removed, banished, 3 weeks ago when the council produced the full evidence analysis." His voice changed on that, something underneath the control. The ledgers, the forged correspondence, her actual history. She wasn't from Westfall. The contacts she had— He stopped, breathed. She was placed, intentionally, by parties with Eastern Corridor interests. We have partial identification on the backing entity, but not complete. "I have complete identification," Serafina said. The table went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Darius looked at her. The Northern Moon Coalition's intelligence network has been tracking the operation for 3 years, she said. Vivian Crow's actual name is Mira Solon. She worked a near-identical operation in Thornfield Territory 4 years ago and in Crestwood 2 years before that. Both territories lost their primary trade routes within 18 months of her departure. Both are now operating under protectorate agreements with the Varik Consortium, an Eastern commercial alliance that has been systematically acquiring territorial trade corridors for the past decade. She let that settle. You weren't the target, Darius. Silver Ridge's Eastern Passage was the target. You were the mechanism. The silence that followed had weight to it. Elder Maris had gone very still, the kind of stillness that meant a mind moving at full speed behind an immobile face. The Varik Consortium, Darius said. Slowly. They don't wage war. They don't need to. They identify territories with internal fault lines, and they insert someone who knows how to widen those lines until the structure collapses on its own. She held his gaze. In our case, the fault line was you and me, the gap between what you needed to believe about yourself and what I actually represented. She found it in 2 months. I should have found her faster. You were finding her, he said. I stopped you. Yes. Another silence. This one was different. This was the silence of a man sitting with the full-dimensional reality of what he'd done. Not just the act at the canyon, but the 18 months before it, the cumulative choices, the preferences he'd fed without examining them. Serafina watched his face and saw the moment it landed completely and found herself feeling something she hadn't anticipated. Not satisfaction, not even close. Just a terrible, clean sorrow for the waste of it. For 15 years of something real that had been dismantled not by force, but by appetite. His appetite for a simpler story about himself. She set it aside. There were 46 other people in this room, and a territory failing to its south, and she didn't have the capacity right now for sorrow. Sorrow was for after. What does Silver Ridge need most immediately? She said to Elder Maris. Maris didn't hesitate. She had been waiting for this question. The Eastern grain suppliers need direct contact from someone they trust. 3 of the 4 have suspended contracts but haven't formally voided them. They're waiting. The Harrow Pack border situation needs a diplomatic communication that carries actual authority, not just Darius's mark. They don't trust his mark right now. And the internal pack, the warriors, the regional coordinators, they need to see you, not hear about you, see you. How long until the supply situation becomes critical? 30 days, possibly 25. Serafina nodded. She had known it would be something like that. She had been running the calculations since the second rider. I'll come back to Silver Ridge, she said. The tension in the room shifted, a collective exhale across 47 people that the room's stone walls absorbed without comment. As Luna, Darius started. Not as Luna. Her voice was quiet and absolute. I will come back to Silver Ridge as its administrator and primary diplomatic representative with full independent authority over the supply crisis, the Eastern Alliance restoration, and the Harrow border situation. I will report to the Council, not to you. My decisions in those 3 areas are not subject to your veto. Serafina, I'm not finished. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. When the immediate crisis is resolved, which will take 60 to 90 days, the Council will conduct a full review of Silver Ridge's leadership structure. That review will include a formal accountability proceeding for what happened at the canyon. Whatever that proceeding determines, I will accept. If it determines that you remain alpha with restrictions, I will work within that structure. If it determines otherwise, I will work within that structure. But I will not return as your Luna, and I will not operate under your authority. Those are not negotiable conditions. You're asking me to cede control of my own territory, he said. Low. Something dangerous in it, not threat exactly. The sound of a man's last wall under pressure. I'm asking you to accept the consequences of what you did, she said. Partial consequences. The minimum version of them. Because Silver Ridge's people need what I know, and they need it now. And that means I'm walking back through that gate, regardless of what I'm called when I do it. She looked at him steadily. You pushed me off a cliff, Darius. I walked 4.5 days on broken ribs to survive it. I am not here to negotiate whether I deserve better than what you're offering. I'm here to decide whether Silver Ridge deserves what I can give it." He looked at her for a long time. Then something in his face, that last wall, came down. Not dramatically, not with any sound. Just a settling, a subsidence, the way a structure finally accepts the load it's been resisting. "Yes," he said, "whatever terms the council sets." Elder Maris exhaled. Around the room, the warriors shifted. Serafina nodded once, started to rise. And then the eastern door of the coalition's hall opened, and Isabel came through it fast, which was wrong. Isabel moved deliberately at all times, economy of motion, never fast without reason. She crossed the room to Serafina's side and leaned down and said 3 sentences quietly against her ear. Serafina's hands went still on the table. She straightened slowly, looked at the far wall for exactly 2 seconds, then looked at Isabel. "How long ago?" she said. 2 hours. Our border scouts confirmed it an hour ago." "How many?" "Enough." Isabel's voice was flat with the specific flatness of a soldier delivering news they've already processed, so the recipient doesn't have to watch them process it. 400 coalition warriors. They're moving on the northern compound." Silence. Elder Maris was on her feet. "Who?" "The Varick Consortium," Serafina said. Her voice had gone somewhere very quiet. "They know I'm here. They know what we know." She looked at Isabel. "Vivienne." She must have made contact before the banishment, gave them the timeline. "She told them I survived." Not a question. "She told them you survived, and that you'd be here and that you'd be building a case that could expose the full operation." Isabel met her eyes directly. "They're not coming for Silver Ridge. They're coming for you." The room had gone absolutely still. 47 Silver Ridge pack members. Isabel's garrison of 80 coalition fighters. One woman who had walked out of a canyon on broken bones and spent 43 days building a case that had just become a target on her back. Darius was on his feet. "We fight." "You can't fight 400 with 80, Serafina said. Her voice was steady. Her mind was already somewhere else, moving through the problem with the same mechanism that had moved through the canyon floor in the dark. No grief, no panic, just the immediate structure of what was survivable and what was not. "We have 2 hours. Maybe less." She looked at Isabel. "Is the southern passage clear?" "For another hour. They'll close it once they're in position." "Then we move in 40 minutes. She looked around the room, at the Silver Ridge warriors, at Maris, at Darius. Everyone who can ride leaves in 40 minutes with everything that matters. The intelligence files, the evidence package on the Varick Consortium, all of it. She looked at Isabel. "Your garrison." "They know how to scatter and regroup," Isabel said. "We have secondary locations." "Use them." Serafina picked up the intelligence file from the table. 3 months of compiled evidence, the full architecture of what Vivienne had been, what the consortium was, what they had done to 3 territories and were attempting to do to a 4th. "This is what they want destroyed." She looked at Isabel. "Can you get a copy to the High Council's northern seat?" "If we move in 40 minutes. "Then we move in 40 minutes. She looked at Darius. He was watching her with an expression she had no historical reference point for. Something past shame, past the formality of what he'd come here to say, stripped down to something rawer and more essential. "You should have come sooner," she said. Not angry, just true. He had nothing to say to that, because it was the truest thing in the room. She picked up the file and walked to the door. She had survived the canyon. She had survived the walk. She had survived the 43 days of rebuilding what she was from the compound fractures of what she had been. She was not going to let the Varick Consortium bury the evidence in a northern compound, while the territory that needed it most scrambled to understand why the ground kept moving under their feet. But what happened in the next 40 minutes would require a version of her that she had been deciding for 3 months whether she was willing to become. Not the patient one, not the load-bearing wall, something with edges, something that didn't absorb, something that pushed back. She made the decision in the space between one step and the next, the way the most permanent decisions always got made, not at a table, not in a formal proceeding, but in the body, in motion, already enacted before the mind finished ratifying it. She kept walking. 40 minutes was a number. 28 was what they actually had. The coalition scout came back through the southern gate at a dead run, and the number on his face was written before he opened his mouth. The specific compression of someone who has seen something and run the math, and the math is worse than the estimate. Isabel got to him first. 2 sentences. Then she turned and crossed the yard to where Serafina was overseeing the evidence loading and said, "They move faster. Southern Passage closes in 11 minutes." Serafina looked at the yard. 3 horses loaded, 2 more being saddled. The intelligence files in their case, half strapped to the lead animal. Darius across the yard with 2 of his warriors moving supply packs. Elder Maris at the gate directing the Silver Ridge contingent with the calm efficiency of a woman who had survived 4 territorial crises and understood that panic was a resource expenditure with 0 return. 11 minutes. "New plan," Serafina said. "I'm listening." "Split the group. Everyone who can ride fast takes the Southern Passage in the next 6 minutes. That's the elders, the junior staff, the non-combatants. They take 1 copy of the evidence package to the High Council seat. They do not stop." She turned to face Isabel fully. "Your 80 hold the compound long enough for the passage to clear. Then they scatter to secondary locations per your standing protocol. And the Silver Ridge warriors, they ride with me." She looked across the yard at Darius. He was already watching her, had been watching her since the scout came in, reading the geometry of the situation with the battlefield instinct that had always been his genuine and undeniable quality. "We don't go south. We go east." Isabel was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That takes you toward the consortium's approach vector. It takes us toward Silver Ridge's eastern corridor, which is what they actually want. If they're here for me and for the files, the way to pull them off the compound is to give them a more valuable target moving in the opposite direction. You're using yourself as bait. I'm using the evidence package as bait. I happen to be carrying it." She looked at Isabel steadily. "Get your people out. Get the elders out. Get Maris to the High Council with the secondary copy." "Secondary copy," Isabel said. "You have a secondary copy." "I made one last night." She tapped the inner pocket of her riding jacket. "I've been making secondary copies of everything important since I was 22 years old. It's kept me alive twice now." She turned and walked toward Darius. He met her halfway. "East," he said. He'd already read it. Of course he had. "East. Your 6 warriors and whatever speed we have." She looked at him. "This isn't a rescue operation. It isn't a demonstration. We are moving evidence that can dismantle a decade-long consortium operation to the one location in the Eastern Corridor where it can be formally submitted to the High Council's Trade Oversight Chamber. If we get it there, they lose everything they've built in 3 territories. And if we don't, then they come back in 2 years with a different name and a different face, and they find a different fault line in a different territory, and they do it again." Her voice was flat and certain. "I'm not interested in surviving this and handing them the next 20 years. I'm interested in ending it." His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the thing she recognized, the full burn of attention that meant he was genuinely, completely present in a way she had not seen from him in more than a year. "Whatever you need," he said. 6 horses. Move in 4 minutes. She was already turning. They went out the eastern gate at a hard gallop with the consortium's advanced scouts visible on the northern ridge, dark figures against the gray sky, stationary for the 3 seconds it took to identify the movement, and then suddenly not stationary at all. Serafina rode low, her left arm, fully healed but not forgotten, tight against her body from old reflex, the evidence case strapped across her back, the secondary copy against her ribs. The ground east of the coalition compound was open flatland for the first 2 miles before it broke into the forested ridge country that bordered Silver Ridge's western edge. Open ground was dangerous. Open ground was also fast. She didn't look back. She counted hoofbeats, 6 sets behind her, the rhythm of Darius's horse she'd have recognized anywhere, even after months of absence. Something in the cadence specific to the way he rode, all forward weight and controlled aggression. They hit the first tree line with 200 yards of lead on the closest pursuit. In the trees, the rules changed. Speed became secondary to navigation, and the consortium's numbers advantage compressed down to whatever width the trail allowed. Serafina knew these particular ridges. She had ridden them during the early years of the coalition relationship, mapping trade routes, cataloging terrain. The knowledge was old, but the terrain didn't change much. She took them north-northeast along a fire trail that wound uphill before dropping hard toward the river crossing that fed into Silver Ridge's western border. The pursuing force was good. She could hear them in the trees, not their voices, just the sound of disciplined riders who knew how to move in cover, spaced wide enough to prevent a single obstacle from taking out multiple horses. "There are more of them in the trees," said the warrior riding closest to her left. A young woman named Petra, who Serafina had known since Petra was a junior stable hand. "They're trying to flank right." "I know." Serafina didn't slow. "They want to push us north, away from the river crossing. Then we go south. We go straight, faster than they expect." She looked at Petra. "How good are you with that rifle?" Petra's expression answered before she did. "Then cover the right flank. Just noise. I don't need casualties. I need them to commit to a direction." She raised her voice enough for the warriors behind to catch it. "Hold formation. Nobody breaks. We stay together or we're worth nothing." Darius pulled up alongside her. His horse was breathing hard but not spent. They had more in them. His face had the grim, settled look of a man who had shut everything down except the immediate problem, which was the version of him she trusted most in a physical crisis. "River crossing is defended," he said. "They'll have people there. This is a funnel." "Yes." "You knew." "I suspected." The eastern approach made too much sense for them not to anticipate it. She kept her eyes on the trail ahead. The crossing has 2 access points, the main ford and the upstream narrows. They'll have the ford. The narrows is a bad crossing. Rocks, fast water. For a large force, 8 horses single file is a different calculation. He was quiet for a breath. "You're going to get us across the narrows." "I'm going to try." "You've done it before." "Once, in summer, the water was lower." She glanced at him. "Spring runoff is a factor." "How significant a factor?" "We'll know when we get there." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Under different circumstances, under any other circumstances, she would have recognized it as the specific sound of Darius Blackthorne accepting a situation that scared him without letting the fear change his direction. She had loved that sound once. She registered it now as data. He was still capable of it, which meant he was still capable of the things it represented. She filed that away for later, alongside everything else that was accumulating in the folder labeled later, which was growing substantial. The rifle behind her fired twice. Petra's voice, "Right flank is committed." "Good. Stay tight." They broke out of the tree line onto the river's upper bank with the narrows 50 yards to the left and the main ford 200 yards downstream where Serafina could already see the dark shapes of consortium fighters positioned in the rocks. The ford was locked. She turned left without slowing. The narrows were worse than summer. The snowmelt had pushed the water up 6 inches at minimum, and the rock shelf that made a crossing possible was submerged by half. She could see it, the darker line of the shelf under the white water, still there, still solid, just wet and fast over the top of it. She didn't stop to assess. Stopping to assess was the thing that made crossings like this kill people, the hesitation that let fear translate into error. She pushed her horse straight in. The cold hit like a wall. Not air cold, water cold, the specific cold of mountain runoff that made muscles seize if you gave them a chance to process it. Her horse lurched on the first rock, found its footing, pushed forward. The water was thigh-high on the horse's legs at the shelf's edge, white and loud, the noise of it filling up everything. She kept her weight forward, kept her legs working, kept her eyes on the opposite bank, and nowhere else. 12 seconds, maybe 15. The horse scrambled up the far bank and she turned in the saddle. Darius was midway across. Behind him, 2 warriors. Petra was just entering the water. The remaining 3 coming hard down the bank. 300 yards south, the consortium force at the ford had spotted the crossing. She could hear the shouting over the water. "Move," she said, under her breath, to nobody. "Move, move, move." Darius came out of the water with his horse blowing hard, water streaming from both of them. He pulled up beside her, and they watched together as Petra crossed, and the next warrior crossed, and the next. The last two horses hit the narrows as the first consortium riders reached the ford and began pushing through it downstream. Faster than she'd wanted, but not fast enough to cut them off, not with 200 yards of river between them. The last warrior came out of the water. Serafina counted 7, all 8 horses. "East," she said. "Don't stop until the border." They hit Silver Ridge's western border marker as the light was going, the old stone post with the territory's mark carved into it that Serafina had ridden past so many times she had stopped seeing it. She saw it now. She felt something in her chest when they crossed it that she hadn't expected. Not homecoming, nothing soft. Something harder. A recognition. This ground was hers in a way that had nothing to do with Darius's authority or the council's designation. She had built this place. The feeling of it under her horse's feet was the feeling of her own work, 15 years of it, and no one's hands at her back had changed that. The consortium pursuit broke off at the border, not from fear, from strategy. Crossing into Silver Ridge territory meant a declaration that would cost them more than the evidence package, and they were careful enough to know it. She heard them stop, felt the pursuit's pressure evaporate. She slowed her horse to a walk. Around her, 7 people doing the same, Darius and 6 warriors, all of them water-soaked and mud-spattered and breathing like they'd earned it. Petra had a cut on her jaw from a tree branch. One of the male warriors was riding with one hand, the other held against his ribs, something cracked or compressed in the crossing. Nobody said anything for a long moment, just the horses breathing and the border trees moving in the cold wind. Darius pulled up alongside her. His face was stripped down to something she hadn't seen on it since the early years. Before the territory fully stabilized, before the weight of alpha authority had layered over his natural expressions. He looked at her with the open, unguarded look of a man who had just watched someone move through a crisis and understood, past any argument, what he was looking at. She didn't give him the moment. It wasn't the time. "How far to the nearest settlement?" she said. 6 miles, Petra answered. "Westgate Garrison. We stop there for the night. I need a secured room, a fire, and a direct line to the High Council's Trade Oversight Chamber." She looked at Darius. "When we submit this evidence package, I need the Council's formal co-signature on the submission. Not advisory, not pending review, full Council authorization." She held his gaze. "Can you get me that?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "Then let's ride." But the Westgate Garrison commander was a woman named Holt, who had served Silver Ridge's western border for 11 years, and who, when Serafina rode in through the gate, did something no one in the yard expected. She stopped in the middle of the yard, and she looked at Serafina on the horse, soaked through and carrying a dented evidence case, and trailing 6 exhausted riders, including her alpha, and she straightened to full attention and held it. Around the yard, every other garrison member did the same, not for Darius, for her. Serafina registered it, let it land without letting it show. She dismounted, gave her horse to the stable hand, and walked toward the garrison's main building with the measured step of someone who had been walking toward problems for 15 years and had not yet found one that was worth running from. Holt fell in beside her. "What do you need, Luna?" "I'm not Luna," Serafina said. "With respect," Holt said without breaking stride. "That's not how the garrison sees it." Serafina said nothing. She walked. Inside the garrison's main room, while Holt organized the fire and the communication equipment, Darius found her at the window looking out at the border tree line. The yard was full of sound, horses, voices, the garrison coming alive around the new arrivals. The eastern corridor spread out below the garrison's ridge position, the trade road she had mapped and maintained visible in the fading light as pale lines across the dark terrain. "The evidence submission," she said, without turning. "When the High Council receives it and the consortium is formally exposed, the Trade Oversight Chamber will move to restore Silver Ridge's Eastern agreements. That process will take 60 days minimum. We can survive 60 days if the grain situation is managed," he said. "I know we can. I've already written to the Eastern suppliers. 2 of the 4 have informally confirmed they'll hold." She paused. "The territory is going to come back. The question is what it looks like when it does." He was quiet. The accountability proceeding, she said. The council review. You said yes to it in that room, and I'm holding you to it. I know. Whatever it determines, I said I know. His voice was rougher than the control. Underneath the control was something she hadn't heard from him in years. Not the alpha voice, not the managed authority. The actual man, without the layers. I said whatever terms the council sets, and I meant it. All of it. A pause. I don't expect... He stopped. Started again. I know I don't have the right to expect anything from you. I'm not saying this because I think it changes something. I'm saying it because it's true. What I did at that canyon, his voice broke once, hard and brief, and he caught it. There isn't a frame I can put around it that makes it something different from what it was. She turned from the window, looked at him in the garrison's firelight, soaked and exhausted and reduced to something that was either his worst version or his most honest one. She thought about the canyon, about the cold water and the broken bones and 4.5 days of walking. She thought about what it cost a person to survive the thing that was supposed to kill them. Not the physical cost, the interior one, the reconfiguration of everything you understood about trust and permanence and the people you'd built your life around. She had come out of that canyon a different load-bearing arrangement, not weaker, not harder in the way that was really just brittleness. Something more deliberate, something that knew exactly what it was holding up and had chosen to hold it. I know, she said. Her voice was even. We'll let the council proceeding determine the rest. She picked up the evidence case and turned toward the communication room. The High Council's Trade Oversight Chamber needed to hear from her tonight. The consortium needed to know the evidence had survived the crossing. The Eastern suppliers needed confirmation. The garrison needed orders. The 60 days needed to start. She was 10 feet from the communication room door when the garrison's outer alarm sounded. One long tone, then two short. Not pursuit, not attack. Arrival. Holt appeared in the doorway. Her face had an expression on it that Serafina couldn't read at first, which was unusual. Holt was a transparent woman by nature. Then she read it. Surprise, compressed under professionalism, with something underneath that was almost disbelief. Luna, Holt said and stopped. What is it? The Eastern Road. Holt stepped aside from the doorway, opening the sight line to the garrison's eastern-facing window. You need to see this. Serafina crossed to the window. The Eastern Road below the garrison ridge was lit by torchlight. Not soldiers. No formation. No weapons forward movement. People. Hundreds of them, moving on foot and horseback and cart. A column that stretched back into the dark beyond the torchlight's reach. And at its front, the mark of every major Silver Ridge settlement she could identify. Their banner poles carried by hands that were shaking with cold or exhaustion or something else entirely. They had come. Not because Darius had ordered them, not because the council had sent them. Because word had moved through Silver Ridge the way word moves through a territory that is genuinely, organically alive. Imperfectly, fast, carried by people who trusted the information because they trusted the source. And they had come. They've been walking since this morning, Holt said quietly. Since the news reached the eastern settlements that you were alive. Serafina stood at the window and looked at the torchlight on the road below, at the hundreds of people who were the actual substance of what she had built, not the ledgers, not the trade agreements, not the systems and the protocols, but the people who had lived under those systems and known, in the wordless way that people know things, who was actually keeping the lights on. She stood very still. Behind her, she heard Darius come to the window, heard his breath go out in a single long exhale. And then she heard something she had not heard from him since the first years. The sound of the man, completely unguarded, with nothing left to manage. Serafina, he said, her name in his voice like a weight he was finally setting down. She didn't turn. Below, the column of torchlight kept coming. Kept coming. More than she had expected. More than she had let herself imagine in the long, cold nights at the Coalition compound when she was working the problem and refusing the grief. She pressed her right hand flat against the cold glass of the window. The evidence case was in her left. The secondary copy was against her ribs. The eastern corridor was lit below her by the people who had come looking for the thing they had lost. She had survived the canyon. She had walked out on broken bones. She had crossed a flooding river and outrun a consortium force and moved evidence across a hostile border in a single night. And now, standing at a garrison window with the territory laid out below her in torchlight, she understood that surviving had only been the first question. The second question, the harder one, was about to be answered whether she was ready or not. Not whether she would go back, but what she would build when she did, and who she would be in the building of it. The door of the garrison opened behind her. She heard boots on the stone floor, many of them approaching from the road. The first of the Silver Ridge people were coming inside. She took her hand from the glass, turned around. She turned around and the garrison was full of people. Not the formal delegation, not the elders in their travel clothes carrying the council's silver case. The people who had walked the eastern road with torches. Farmers, supply coordinators, a woman Serafina recognized as the head of the Westgate Market who had once sat across her table arguing over grain futures with the focused intensity of someone who understood that every decimal point represented a family's winter. A young man she had promoted to junior route coordinator 18 months before her fall, who was standing near the back of the room with his hat in his hands and his jaw working like he was trying to decide whether to speak. They filled the garrison's main hall to its walls, and then some. Pressed together in the cold with torch smoke and road dust on their clothes, looking at her with expressions that ran the full range of what people looked like when the thing they had stopped expecting suddenly appeared in front of them. She stood at the front of the room and looked back. Nobody spoke first. That was the thing she would remember most clearly afterward. The silence before any word was said, the specific quality of it, a room full of people holding their breath not from fear, but from the fragile, almost painful hope of being on the edge of something they were afraid to name too soon. Elder Maris stepped forward from the crowd. She had made it. The Southern Passage, the High Council delivery, and apparently the Eastern Road as well, because Maris had never in 40 years of service allowed anyone else to be present at a moment she considered historically significant. "Luna Vale," Maris said. "I've told 3 people today that I'm not Luna." "And all 3 of them ignored you," Maris said, "because the title isn't Darius's to take away. It was never his to give. The pack recognizes a Luna the way ground recognizes water, not by decree, by necessity." She looked at Serafina with the flat, unsentimental gaze of a woman who traded in truths whether they were comfortable or not. "Silver Ridge recognizes you." Serafina looked at the room, at the hundreds of faces, at the young route coordinator in the back who had finally stopped working his hat and was standing straight. She thought about the canyon, the cold and the dark, and the 4.5 days of moving on broken bones, because movement was the only thing that stood between her and the alternative. She thought about the coalition compound and the intelligence files and the evidence package pressed against her ribs all through the river crossing and the hard ride east. She thought about 43 days of deciding, piece by piece, what she was willing to become. She had decided she was willing to become the thing with edges, the thing that pushed back. What she hadn't decided, standing in the northern compound with Isabel's intelligence files spread on the table, was what to do with the part of herself that had loved this territory, not as an instrument, but as a living thing. Not as a system she had designed and could redesign. As a place where people grew up and argued over grain futures and taught their children to read and built things they wanted to last. That part had survived the canyon too, quieter than the rest, more essential. "I hear you," she said to the room, her voice carried without effort. She had learned to project in large halls at 23 and had never unlearned it. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She paused. "But there are things that need to be said before anything else. Tonight, in this room, with all of you present, because you walked here and you deserve the truth in front of witnesses, and not in a formal proceeding you read about afterward." The room was completely still. She turned. Darius was standing 6 feet behind her. He had not moved since she turned away from the window. He was looking at her with the open, unmanaged expression that had been building across the last several hours. Not performed, not calculated. Just what his face did when there was nothing left to put in front of it. "Come forward," she said. He came forward. He stood beside her, facing the room full of his people, and she watched the room's reaction, the shift in posture, the tightening of expressions, the particular quality of anger that had nowhere clean to land because the person it was directed at was their alpha, and he was standing there without armor. She spoke before anyone else could. "Darius Blackthorne pushed me off Blackstone Canyon 71 days ago," she said. Flat, clear, no modulation. He was manipulated into it by a systematic deception orchestrated by an operative working for an external commercial entity. That manipulation was real, and it was sophisticated. It does not change what he did. He has acknowledged both things, to me and to the council, and that acknowledgement is on record. She looked at the room. "I'm telling you this not to relitigate it here, not to perform something for your benefit, but because you came out in the cold and walked an Eastern road at night, and you deserve to know that the person you're looking at knows exactly what he did." Silence. Then an older man near the front, she didn't know his name but knew his face, a grain transport coordinator from the northern settlement, said, "And what does that mean for his position?" "The council will conduct a formal accountability proceeding beginning in 14 days, Serafina said. "The process and its outcome will be public record. Everyone in this room will have access to it." She looked at the man directly. "What it means for his position is for that proceeding to determine. Not for me to determine unilaterally, not for him to determine, for the territory's legitimate institutional process to determine." She paused. "That's how it should work. That's how it's going to work." The man held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, sat back. She turned to Darius. He was looking at her with an expression that contained, she thought, almost everything a human face was capable of. There wasn't a word for what it was doing. She looked at it directly and decided to say the things she had been carrying since the coalition compound, since the second week of healing when the ribs had stopped demanding all of her attention and the interior accounting had begun. "You are not the worst thing you did," she said. Her voice was quieter now. For him, not the room, though the room would hear it. "That's not forgiveness. I don't know yet what I have to give in that direction, and I'm not going to say it if I don't know. But I've watched you for 15 years and I know what's real in you. What happened at the canyon was a failure of everything real." She held his gaze. "The proceeding will determine your position. How you live afterward will determine who you are." His jaw moved. His eyes were wet, which he wasn't trying to hide. She had never seen him not try to hide that before. "I know," he said. His voice was barely audible. She nodded once, turned back to the room. "Tonight," she said, "the garrison feeds everyone who walked the road. Tomorrow, we begin the work." The work took 63 days. Not 60. 63 because the Eastern suppliers negotiated harder than her preliminary contacts had suggested, and because the Harrow-Pack border situation required 2 separate delegations before the commander in the field acknowledged that the context had changed. The High Council's Trade Oversight Chamber moved with the ponderous institutional deliberateness of a body that understood its decisions would be cited for decades and was not inclined to be rushed. Serafina moved through those 63 days with the focused efficiency of someone who had stopped factoring hesitation into their workflow. She rode the Eastern Corridor and sat across tables from supply coordinators and alliance partners who had lost confidence and showed them, directly and specifically, what the restoration plan looked like. Not in abstract terms, not in policy language, but in the concrete numerical reality of what Silver Ridge could deliver and on what timeline. She was right about most of it. She was wrong about 2 things and said so immediately, which consistently produced the same reaction from people who were accustomed to positional negotiators, who would rather extend a failing argument than admit a mistake. Trust, once genuinely established, moved faster than any other resource. The Varick Consortium's exposure moved through the High Council's oversight structure with the systematic, irreversible momentum of a formally lodged evidentiary submission. They attempted 3 times in the first 30 days to suppress or discredit the package. Once through a procedural challenge, once through a counter-submission of documents that unraveled under forensic review within a week, once through a direct approach to a council member that became, through what appeared to be a fundamental miscalculation of that particular member's character, additional evidence against them. By day 45, the consortium's eastern operations were frozen, pending full investigation. Their other territorial holdings began to show signs of the same internal fracturing that Silver Ridge had survived. Isabel sent a short message on day 50. 2 sentences. The first said the Thornfield and Crestwood territories had formally applied to reopen their independent trade agreements. The second said she owed Serafina a drink. Serafina read it in the records room at Silver Ridge's Central Hall. Her records room, the one with the window she had cracked on the morning she found the tampered ledger. She sat at the long table with the message in her hand and felt something she hadn't felt in so long. It took her a moment to identify it. Not triumph. Quieter than that. The specific, grounded satisfaction of a structure holding the weight it was designed to hold. She had built this. Not alone. She was clear-eyed about that, about the coordinators and the warriors and Maris and Isabel and the hundreds of people who had walked the Eastern Road at night. But she had designed the architecture. She had understood where the load-bearing elements needed to be, and the building was standing. She folded Isabel's message and put it in her jacket pocket and went back to work. The council's accountability proceeding lasted 4 days. Serafina testified on the first. She was the only witness who refused the formal question and answer structure and asked instead to give a continuous account, which the presiding elder granted after a brief consultation. She spoke for 2 hours. She described the canyon with the same flat precision she had used to describe financial discrepancies at 22. No embellishment, no editorial comment, just the facts in sequence. The room was very quiet for all of it. When she was done, the presiding elder asked if she had a recommendation for the proceedings' outcome. She said, "That's not my determination to make." "You have standing to make a recommendation." "I have standing to make one. I'm choosing not to." She looked at the elder steadily. "The territory should make this decision through its legitimate process, not through my preference. I have too much personal interest in the outcome to be a neutral voice. Whatever the council determines, I will work within it." The proceeding concluded on the 4th day. The council's determination removed Darius as alpha, effective immediately, pending a 12-month period of structured accountability service within Silver Ridge's essential services. The removal was permanent in the traditional leadership sense. He could not stand for alpha election again. His service period required direct community-facing work, infrastructure, supply coordination, the operational groundwork of the territory he had nearly destroyed. At the end of 12 months, the council would review whether the service had been completed in good faith. It was not a gentle determination. It was not a punitive one either. It was institutional, the kind of decision that understood itself to be precedent-setting and had written itself accordingly. Serafina sat in the gallery and listened to it read aloud and kept her face still and her hands quiet in her lap. Afterward, in the corridor outside the proceeding chamber, Darius found her. He looked different than he had at the garrison. Not diminished, something closer to the opposite of that. The weight he had been carrying wrong was distributed differently now, as if accepting the full load had, paradoxically, made it easier to carry. 12 months, he said. Yes. Supply coordination. Something moved across his face. Not bitterness. She looked for it, and it wasn't there. You know I've never done that work. I know. She held his gaze. You're going to learn a great deal about how Silver Ridge actually functions. A pause. Was that your recommendation to the council? I told them I wasn't making one. That's not what I asked. She looked at him for a moment. No, she said. It wasn't my recommendation. The council arrived there independently. She paused. But I think it's right. He was quiet for a long moment. The corridor around them was empty. Everyone else had moved off toward the post-proceeding assembly. Just the two of them, and the stone floor, and 15 years of everything between them. Serafina, he said. Don't, she said, quietly, not harshly. I need to say it. I know you do. She looked at him steadily. And I'm telling you, I'm not ready to receive it yet. That's not permanent. That's where I am right now. She paused. When I'm ready, I'll tell you. That's the most honest thing I can give you. He held her gaze. His jaw worked once. Then he nodded. The nod of a man who had learned at very high cost that accepting what was actually being offered was different from accepting what he wished were being offered. All right, he said. She turned and walked toward the assembly. Amatsum. The council's formal election of Silver Ridge's new sovereign administrator took place on a Tuesday in the 4th week after the proceeding. The title they created was new, Not Luna, not Alpha, not any existing designation. The council had debated it for 6 days. What they arrived at translated, in the territory's old formal language, to something closest to keeper, the one who maintains, the one in whose hands the living structure of the territory rests. The keeper of Silver Ridge, Serafina, stood in the main hall, the same hall she had walked through for 15 years, the hall with the eastern windows that caught the morning light in a particular way she had never stopped noticing. And she received the council's formal vote and the territory's mark and the compound silence of several hundred people who had made a collective decision and were watching it enacted. She did not give a speech. She had told Maris she wouldn't, and Maris had argued for a solid 20 minutes and then accepted it with the expression of a woman who recognized when she was arguing with a wall. What she did instead was look at the room, just that. She stood at the front of Silver Ridge's main hall and looked at the people in it. The elders, the warriors, the supply coordinators, the young route coordinator whose name was Tam, and who had recently been promoted to regional lead, the market woman from Westgate, the grain transport coordinator who had asked the direct question on the night of the Eastern Road. She looked at all of them and let the moment be what it was, without putting anything over the top of it. She had come from the bottom of a canyon. She had walked on broken bones for 4.5 days. She had rebuilt herself in a northern compound from the compound fractures of what she had been before, and she had come back to this hall not as the person who had left it, not the patient load-bearing wall, not the woman who absorbed damage because it was what the situation required, but as the person who had survived discovering what she was made of when all the external structures were stripped away. What she was made of was this: the willingness to come back to the thing you had built even when the building had broken you, because the building was not just yours, it was everyone who lived inside it. The understanding that power was not the same thing as authority, and authority was not the same thing as legitimacy, and legitimacy had to be earned not once but continuously in the daily granular work of being trustworthy to the people who depended on you to see them clearly. She had learned at the bottom of that canyon that the people who broke you were not the full measure of what you were worth, that the full measure was in what you chose to do with the surviving. She had also learned something harder and quieter than that, in the long nights at the Coalition compound, in the hours she had spent not moving through the problem, but simply sitting with the wreckage of what she had believed, that the people who betrayed you left something in you that you had to contend with long after they were gone. Not the wound. The question the wound asked. The question being, what do you do with the capacity to trust once it has cost you everything? She had decided she would keep it, not unchanged, not naive, but she would keep it, because the alternative was a different kind of losing, the kind where you survived intact but empty, where nothing could hurt you because nothing could reach you. She didn't want that life. She had never wanted that life. She looked at the room one more time. Then she turned to Elder Maris, who was standing to her right with the formal ledger and the administrative files and the expression of a woman who was exactly where she had expected to be and was deeply satisfied about it. "Where do we start?" Serafina said. Maris handed her a file. "Eastern Supply Agreements. The Harrow Pack sent a formal restoration request this morning." Serafina opened it, read the first page, made 2 mental notes. "Get me a direct line to their new coordinator," she said. "And find out who's been managing their border garrison, because the person they had 6 weeks ago didn't have the authority to commit to what they're proposing here, and we need to confirm the signatory." "Already on it," Maris said. Serafina nodded and walked to the table. She sat down in the chair she had sat in for 15 years, in the hall with the eastern windows, in the territory she had built from the foundation, and she opened the file fully and began to read. Years later, when people spoke of the Silver Ridge restoration, and they did speak of it in other territories, in the High Council's chambers, in the histories that got written when enough time had passed to see the shape of things, they described it as Serafina Vale's achievement, which was accurate in the way that all significant incomplete descriptions are accurate. What the histories didn't fully capture, because histories tend to compress the granular and the daily into the legible shape of narrative, was what the restoration actually looked like from the inside. It looked like a woman at a table reading files before anyone else was in the building. It looked like Tam growing from regional lead to Eastern Corridor director over 4 years, carrying the institutional knowledge Serafina had spent a decade encoding into him without either of them fully noticing. It looked like Isabel Crane visiting twice a year, and the two of them eating dinner in the Garrison Hall and arguing productively about territorial intelligence sharing until they found the structural design that actually worked. It looked like Darius Blackthorne, 12 months into his accountability service, submitting a formal report on the supply coordination system's inefficiencies that was, Serafina had to acknowledge, genuinely useful. She had read it 3 times, made 12 marginal notes, used 4 of his recommendations, sent it back with the others annotated for his consideration. He had come to her office 2 days later and stood in the doorway and said, "You used the grain routing one." "It's a sound observation," she said without looking up from what she was writing. "I worked 3 months in those warehouses to see that problem clearly." "I know, that's why I used it." A silence. Then he said, quietly, "Is this what the work felt like? For you? Every day?" She put her pen down, looked at him in the doorway. He was thinner than he'd been, harder used. His hands, she noticed, had the calloused quality of someone who had been doing physical labor consistently and recently. "Yes," she said. "Every day." He held her gaze for a moment. Something passed through his face that she didn't fully read and didn't try to. "I'm sorry it took me this long to understand it," he said. She picked up her pen. "I know," she said. "Get back to work." He went. She sat at her table in the eastward-facing room, and the morning light came through the windows the way it always had, and she wrote the next line of what she was writing, and then the next, and then the next. Silver Ridge held. It held for a generation. It held because it had been built by someone who understood that the strongest structures were not the ones that could not be shaken. Nothing built by human hands was immune to shaking, but the ones that had been designed from their deepest foundation to survive it. She had been shaken. She had survived it. She had come back and built something better than what she had built before, because she had built it now with the full knowledge of what it cost and what it was for and what it was worth to the people who lived inside it. That was the whole of it. That was enough.